Welcome back, everybody. Got another episode of Drilling Deeper on tap for you. This is episode 46. I'm Kevin Yannick, editorial director of Pitt & Corey, and today we're zeroing in on safety as our focal point. We've got industry consultant and Pitt & Corey contributor Steve Fuller joining the show as our special guest. But first, let's hear a word from our show sponsor. Did you know East Rock Solutions is now part of the Kemper Group? And together, they're raising the bar on parts availability, equipment solutions, and turnkey plant design. From the pit to the stockpile, Kemper Group has got your operation covered. To learn more, visit KemperEquipment.com or call 610-273-2066. Thanks to Kemper. Well, thanks again to Kemper for supporting Drilling Deeper. We always appreciate the support. With that, let's bring in Jack Kapansky. Jack, what's going on today?
Thrilled to be brought in. Thanks, Kevin. Another exciting day. Talking some safety here.
Yeah, we were talking before we turned the mics on if we'd done something so specialized or so focused on safety on the podcast. And Jack, I think we way back when on the show, maybe episode 8 or something, we talked about MSHA a little bit and the role there and just kind of historic trends with safety. But I don't know that we've had a voice on safety before. And we've got one here today with our monthly magazine contributor, Steve Fuller, who's been an awesome addition to the pages of Pitt & Corey. He joined us as a contributor in November of 24. So I guess by now we've published 9 or 10 of his columns, and you can continue to see his work in Pitt & Corey. And he's been really a welcome addition, Jack, because it's kind of content we haven't had, or a voice in the magazine we haven't had for a number of years. We're fortunate to have such a great partnership on the legal front. We've got MSHA in the Law column regularly in the magazine from Bill Duran and Margo Lopez. But again, in the last 10, 11 months, we've added Steve Fuller, who's giving more boots on the ground type content, and that's kind of what you're going to hear with our interview with Steve here today. But Jack, I know you've been reading Steve's work a little bit here. What's your thought on what he's brought to Pitt & Corey and as an added voice?
Yeah, no, you absolutely took the words right out of my mouth there. I mean, again, having Bill and Margo is just such a valuable insight from that legal front, and being able to sort of talk about what's going on with MSHA, what operators can expect, and kind of giving that really high level technical guidance, which is certainly valuable. But I think since Steve's joined us, I've definitely learned a lot as far as different precautions that operations can take with common issues that may not get talked about as much. Fatigue, heat stress. There was just one he did about I think it was ergonomics. Just the way you're posturing, the way you're positioning yourself, and stuff that again kind of maybe goes not talked about, not thought about, but is definitely impacting the people, again, the boots on the ground, the people that are in the pits and quarries every day. So, and I know he talked a little bit in here about, some different things that he does as a consultant that he talks to companies about, and we'll get into that here a little bit in the interview. But just a very valuable addition. I think he's been great to work with. It was a great interview you had with him. Looking forward to sharing it with everyone. And can never have too much safety content.
No. And as you'll hear again in a moment, Steve's going to talk about the value of a safety. I asked him a little bit about how that's evolved in our industry over the years and across other industries, because Steve has some experience beyond pits and quarries. He's also at the top of our interview going to talk a little bit more about his own history, but just so everyone is aware and has some context to Steve and in his role and touch point to our industry. And he's got more than 20 years of experience in safety and in operational leadership type of roles. And he's been around and in pits and quarries for over the last 8+ years. He's going to share 8 things midway through our interview that he preaches when visiting sites. I kind of found that really fascinating. I had asked him, as a consultant, when you're going into a pit or a quarry, you're called in for the first time, like, what are you talking about? So he has 8 really basic messages. Jack, you kind of talked about the simple things. I mean, there are things that are seemingly simple, but that we kind of forget about sometimes, and sometimes we need to be reminded or have hard reminders about that, unfortunately. So he's going to share those 8 things, and like you said, because it's summer and we're in the dog days of almost August at this point, we're going to hear a little bit more about heat stress and fatigue management, because those are topical here in the month of July and as we're looking into August. So with that, let's play our special interview from guest Steve Fuller. We've got Steve Fuller with us today. Steve of Steve Fuller Company. Great to see you. We've been working together for a while on the Pitt & Corey side, obviously with your Going Home Safely Every Day column, and now we got an opportunity to sit down and
hear about your experience and what it is you're seeing and hearing out there. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kevin. Thanks for letting me in on this. And it's been a joy reading for the magazine and going over a lot of the fundamentals that people that live in pit and quarries kind of see every day. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, for those listening out there or watching who aren't familiar with Steve, we've been working with you since November of 2024.
Mhm.
You put together a series of columns now. They appear monthly in the magazine. Again, it's the Going Home Safely Every Day column. And Steve, the one thing I really appreciate about your work is you put a topic out there, fall protection, slip, trips and falls, those sorts of things. And I feel like a lot of our readers probably have a sense that they have a good grasp on this, but you find a way to just get more depth out of a topic. You talk about real world experiences, things that you saw or lived, and I think there's something that everybody operating within an aggregate site, crushed stone, sand, and gravel can kind of take away from your work. So with this podcast today, really wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about what you're seeing on the front lines these days. But just to get started, Steve, for those who don't know, maybe for those two who aren't familiar with your monthly work in Pit and Quarry, tell us about yourself, about your relation and connectivity to the aggregate industry, and I know you've got kind of an interesting upcoming or upbringing, being in the masonry industry with your family, I think, right? Growing up, so
Yeah,
maybe get
yeah,
into some of that for our readers today.
absolutely. So to put myself through school, I graduated a degree in safety from Keene State College back in the early 2000s. To put myself through school, I worked for a mason and ended up being my father-in-law years later. And it was there where I really kind of learned a lot about what makes things tick as far as a job site goes. And that helped me with my approach to safety, knowing that, I got to keep things that are relatable, that are understandable, that work, so that kind of helped me in how I approach safety issues. So once I got my safety degree, I worked in a power company for about 15 years. Half my time in the power company was operations and half was safety. So I went back and forth from managing work centers and managing safety efforts on a large scale. That also helped me hone in my approach to understand that people, they need to get the job done. They've got conflicting priorities sometimes. So your messaging has to be clear and they have to really understand how it's going to impact them in getting home safely every day. So by keeping the messaging fundamental, I've been successful with execution on the safety side and the operation side. So for the past eight eight plus years, I worked in pits and quarries and with concrete, with oil, with paving. So with all of those activities as well. So that I had 8 years of doing that, and the way that I made my pit and quarry time work well was whenever I would go to a site. Still to this day, the first thing I would do was catch up with the supervisor and say, "What's the highest point in this site?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, just show me up. What's the hardest place to get to?" And I would go to those places with them and walk their sites down and look in the nooks and crannies where no one has been in sometimes years. And by doing that, I think I was able to get the respect of the people in the field by not just showing up and spewing some safety stuff, but getting out, walking the walk, talking the talk, and recognizing that the answers are always in the field. So if I was having a safety challenge, the first thing to do, I had to get out in the field, go see it with my own two eyes, and see what they're up against. Because by recognizing that the answers are in the field, you're collaborating with the people that make this happen every day. Making pits and quarries function is a tough job. The environment's tough. It can be hot. It can be dusty. It's loud. It takes a beating, and I respect the guys and girls a lot for that and really value their input. So getting out and getting to like the oddest locations in their plant always kind of caught people off guard to this day, and helps let them know, like, I want to get out here and get down and dirty with you so we can figure out how to solve these safety challenges. So what does that result in? I did that for like 8 years, Kevin, and now I'm doing my own thing where I'm consulting and I'm working with people in pits and quarries. I'm working with people making drones for the government. I'm working with people building pools next week. I work in any industry that needs help. So I've gotten to a point in my career where I work with industries that are looking for assistance and want to get to the next level, and I hone in on coaching the executive teams and then getting in the field and working with supervisors to make sure they're doing the right thing.
Steve, I'm curious, given that you're going to different sorts of industrial type stops. Obviously, you're still working hand in hand as a consultant with pits and quarries with aggregate operations. I guess what do you find about crushed stone, sand, and gravel sites and their approach and their value of safety versus some other stops that you make? I guess how do we kind of match up or rank up with what you see elsewhere in terms of safety as a value and our general approach, would you say?
Yeah, excellent question, Kevin. So there are two very distinct things that make pits and quarries different from other industries, at least in the Northeast, and that's where I am. I work across the US, but most of my work is in the Northeast. One is the seasonality. So in the Northeast in particular, and probably other parts of the US, it's a very seasonal business where from, let's say, Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's hog wild. You're getting everything done. You're getting a year's worth of work done in half a year. So that creates some interesting challenges from the safety perspective. You've got short time frames to get your safety messaging out before the rubber hits the road. And then you have to make sure that you're staying on top of the seasonal differences that happen within the season. So if you look at like the how we laid out the articles for Pit and Quarry, they have a cadence to them. I just today, it's what is it today, July 15th. I just
15th, yeah.
wrote the September article for Pit and Quarry magazine, and that's all on fall protection. Now, I guess the seasonality there is kind of a play on words, but before that it was fatigue, and before that it was heat. So we kind of went in a certain cadence of, we know the heat's going to be the worst in July, so let's hit that. We know people are going to start getting tired in August, so we're hitting that. And then fall protection, why I picked fall protection for September is things start to slow up a little bit and you start having to do major maintenance, and that might put you in areas that need different fall protection. So back to your question, the seasonality is drastically different in pit and quarries than it is in, I've worked in factories for General Electric. That's pretty predictable day in and day out. It's definitely seasonal differences there. Turnover, I've seen this also impact a lot of industries, but it can be, in particular, it can be tough in the pit and quarry world, where turnover can impact people's retention, obviously, because you're getting new people in, or what their priorities are. So that's another challenge that's always in my head when I'm working with pit and quarries is, what's your turnover like? And I ask that a lot because I've had some people say 50%. I've had some people say nothing. These people love this. They're here every day. And that's great. But if you pick up on an organization that has a 50% turnover rate, and I've actually seen much higher than that in some organizations, but when you see that, you have to then go, well, then half your people have no idea what I'm talking about if I'm talking about something that you think is standard for the business. So you almost have to start over with your messaging every beginning of the season, because it's just you're talking, you're speaking Latin and they don't know Latin yet. So you have to make sure that you keep that in your mind. So those are two pretty big differences with pit and quarries as opposed to other industries. Turnover and seasonality are something that you go in on. Outside of that, some of the challenges you share with other industries, but working outside, that's a whole nother ball game. And it's what made this industry great during COVID times, right? We could do our work and we could stay separate from people. At the time, I was in a vertically integrated organization that had, it was great for COVID. They had paving operations, they had concrete operations, they had pits and quarries, and they had a lot of other stuff. But those challenges do align with challenges of other industries, but those are kind of some more unique things. So dusty, hot environments in the summer, we got to contend with that in pits and quarries, and it is a unique challenge.
Steve, you hit on something with the workforce is with that turnover rate, that potentially being a safety issue. Something, makes sense. I hadn't really thought about that much, but so the idea of I wanted to ask you about here is about motivating. The idea of starting over, like you're talking about, from season to season or year to year, that's frustrating. I suppose that could have some implications on safety. But just the idea, that, and we're here in July, we're talking about heat. August, again, that's your column topic for August, is going to be fatigue management. So, I mean, we get to a point where, maybe some of our work gets redundant or repetitive, and a lot of the safety issues or the accidents that happen out there happen in some cases because of complacency. So I guess I wonder, as you reflect back on your own experience, as you think too about some of the sites you're visiting as a consultant these days, what are you seeing in terms of motivation to get people to think about safety proactively and live and breathe it versus simply just talking about it and knowing it's a value, but going out there and proactively doing it every day.
And that's another good one too, Kevin. So here's the deal. Like when I was managing operations, the last thing I would talk about when I would get in the field would be operations. I would always start with something else. And it's the same thing with safety. When I'm out there for safety, I try to connect with the people on other items before we even get into safety. So what message do you kind of get from what I just said? Treat people as humans and talk about their lives before you get into any of the performance metrics, whether it's quality or safety or anything else. Uh, get to that. That's how I believe you get to motivation levels when you start digging under the surface with people and, hey, how's it going? What are you doing for the summer? How are the kids? All that. When you get into what really drives them to get home safely every day, it's never a safety manual. It's never policies and procedures. It's always getting home to either family or hobbies, or, in the Northeast, a lot of people like to hunt and fish. So I'll talk about that. So I will get into the person and talking about what drives them before we ever talk about safety. Because then after you get to know people, you're able to tie that into safety or operations where you can go, all right, clearly you're up there 15 feet in the air. I know you want to get up in your tree stand later this fall. In order for you to do that, you need to have your fall protection on when you're up there. Okay, bud? And if you have that relationship built, those conversations are a lot easier. So from a motivation perspective, my advice for any ops person or any safety person out there is get to know your teams, get to know what makes them tick. And after that, you can fine tune all the other stuff. Now, the obvious exception to all that, Kevin, is if you're out there and you see something that's immediately dangerous to life or health, that's not the time to ask them how their kids are doing. You got to jump into, don't touch that wire, you're going to fry yourself. You got to deal with those. But 99 times out of 100, when you first set foot on site, you're not dealing with what would be known as an IDLH, immediate danger to life or health. You're dealing with little stuff, and you can get into kind of their personal needs before you get into some of the big stuff. So that'd be my number one thing for motivators. Just get to know people, get to know what makes them tick, and then kind of work with that.
Steve, what do you think drove your own interest and passion on safety as a subject? Was there an event or two throughout your career, in operations, or just coming up that really stuck with you? Something that was a safety or health thing that resonated and made you want to go down this kind of unique pathway that your career is taking?
What drove me into safety? That's an interesting answer. So I was a full-time firefighter, certified in the state of Vermont, living at the fire department, as one of my jobs to put me through college, and working for a Mason at the time. And at the nighttime, I was sleeping in the fire department, getting paid for that. And that's how I was funding my own college career. I was going to school to be a teacher, English and history teacher, and I did an internship in the school system. And as soon as I got in the school system, I went, this is not for me. I love kids. I love my kids. I love that stuff, but I just wasn't designed to be a teacher. So my instincts were, I'm done with school. I'm gonna go the firefighting route. And my wife was my girlfriend then, and she said, hey, you can do that, but you're gonna finish school. You're already halfway through. And I listened. So I went and cracked open a book of courses offered at Keene State, and I found a fire science class in the safety realm, and that's what started me to look into the degree. And then all of those courses really aligned well with my brain, probably from my years of being a firefighter and stuff like that. So just helping others is kind of what clicked with me, and then getting into the workforce with a safety background was the most interesting thing, because every organization out there needs safety support, from someone down the road from me right now that I'm supporting that has 30 employees, to when I was at CRH and they had close to 40,000, I think, across the US. Like, everyone needs help. So it's just a matter of figuring out if your personality can work with organizations and help them get more people home safely every day. And that's as simple as my mission is working with organizations to get home people safely every day. I'm still doing it now. I'm just doing it for myself, and I'm doing it with organizations that really want to keep moving in the right direction. So kind of a long answer, Kevin, and I don't know if I really hit the nail on the head there with you, but really it was just a good fit for me, and continues to be.
Yeah, I really just want to kind of get a sense of kind of what drove you into that area. But I also wanted to get a sense too, because of your 20 plus years living in this area. You've been in piston quarries for the last 8 plus, I think you said, Steve.
Yep.
So safety is a value. I think back on just my experience covering the industry. I know the last 40 years have probably changed dramatically in terms of how aggregate producers look at safety or go about doing it, managing it, talking about it. And I feel like you talk to companies out there in the industry, probably no one's going to say it's not a core value, and probably
Mm.
just about everyone's going to say it's core value number one. So I guess I just wanted to ask, when you think about whether it's in our industry or not, safety is a value and how that has kind of become central to what it is the companies that you're around do. Because there was a time, like I said, I suppose before we were around, Steve, where you know it was something that somebody thought of, but we weren't really practicing it quite like we are here in 2025.
Mm. Yeah. So from a value perspective, there's a gentleman that runs Pike Industries. His name's Barry Duffy. He's the president of Pike Industries, and he came from Pensy, and he was in a couple other places before then. But he would always say, and this resonated with me really well. Barry would always say, safety, quality, production in that order, and he meant it. Like you don't move on to quality until safety's done. You don't move on to production until you've got the other two done. And he said that so frequently that it just became kind of ingrained in people's brains that that's the right order to do it in. And I'll never forget when he first said it, and I kind of thought it was like, okay, he's just saying that. But then when you have a leader who believes something and keeps saying it, their team follows suit. So safe quality production in that order is the best example I've seen of a leader owning that and really sticking true to it and not letting things happen that were safe. He had no problem saying, we're going to shut that down until we fix this problem. So it wasn't just the lip service, it was the action that went into it. And I don't see that in every organization. I see it in a lot of them, but I'll give Barry Duffy and the Pike team a lot of credit for hitting that hard. Uh, Everyone will get safety into their value system, but what separates the truly excellent companies from the good companies are the ones that don't just say it, but they believe it. And they make sure that their employees know that they're not just empowered to do things in regards to safety, but responsible to do things in regards to safety as well. Uh, and you're right. 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been called a core value in a lot of organizations. It might have been called a priority, and priorities can shift, right? Oh, it's a priority. Well, it's a priority
Mhm.
now, and then all of a sudden the season gets busy and it's still a priority, but maybe it dropped down to 3 or 4. Those days are still out there for some organizations, but most organizations are smart enough to now know that for a number of reasons, whether it's making sure your employees are safe every day and they get home, or they're smart enough to know, like, if we don't do this right, this could be a nuclear impact to our organization going forward. So we got to get it right no matter what. One nuclear verdict can tank a small or medium-sized company very quickly. So people have learned through the years to get their heads kind of in the right zone for this.
Steve, what ultimately drives a company to give you a call, to have you come in to assess what they're doing and offer advice? I mean, again, so it seems like safety has risen, as you described, from a priority to now a value. I think that's a really good way to kind of assess the history of it. But still, there's companies out there that maybe struggle because of turnover, like you mentioned. So I guess what drives someone to pick up the phone, call you, bring you in to hopefully help elevate their safety culture above where it was prior to that call?
There's been three things I've noticed in my time consulting. The phone will ring after a major event. Someone has a problem, and um, 3 years ago, I got a call from an organization that they were going to get kicked off from a certain project, and this wasn't exactly pit and core related, but they're going to kicked off a certain project because of an event they had. So they needed to bring me in to clean things up. So reactive is one thing that has people calling me. Um, Proactive is the next one that has people calling me. People that are just smart enough to notice things might be going well, but we've got a lot of risk that isn't managed. So I see that actually more frequently than you think. People that realize that maybe they've been lucky and not good for a long time. So they're dealing with risks, whatever it may be, and they just know that they need to tighten things up. Maybe the organization is getting bigger, maybe they took on more projects, but usually those are the real smart leaders that are seeing the future going, okay, maybe this worked well when we were just doing XYZ, but now that we're growing, we need to have some tighter processes. So reactive, proactive, and then the third one, and this one is interesting, and it's not a knock on anyone that might be leaving the position, but often when someone retires, I'll get a phone call like, hey, we just need to revamp how we're thinking things. And it's not that the person before was doing things bad. It's just that they're realizing that this is a good time now that maybe someone has left the position and there's an opening. It's a good time if we want change to have change come in here. So I'll be brought in as a change agent to organizations that are ready to transition. And it doesn't mean that they were doing something bad or that they were doing something great. It's just, now is the time for maybe a little bit of new blood to think about something. So those are the three times that my phone will ring. Reactive problems, proactive because someone sees that they could be doing things in a better way, or just, hey, maybe it's time for a little bit of change.
Sure. Curious too, what's that process or what's that experience look like? So somebody calls you, whether it's a reactive, a proactive, or there's turnover and there's an opportunity there to maybe change. So I guess is that a matter of just kind of paying them a visit, having a few conversations? I guess what's the depth or what's that overall experience like? What does a safety consultant do when they go and visit a pit or quarry or another industrial type environment?
Yeah, great. So how I manage that, I mean, sometimes if it's a very simple question, sometimes it's just phone calls. I'm helping people out and just they move on. But if it's a bigger thing, like, hey, I need my safety culture assessed, or I need a safety manual written or something like that, boots on the ground is the single biggest thing that I will say to clients. Like, I'm happy to help you, but I'm not going to rate like a safety manual or policy if I can't go see what you're dealing with, because at that point they just become dust collectors. Anyone can chat GPT a safety manual or policy in about 20 seconds. And I simply refuse to use the chat GPT functions because I feel like they're just going to collect dust and it's just checking a box. So in order to make programs and policies and solutions more effective, boots on the ground is the first thing I will do. So yeah, I'll talk with the client and say, happy to do this. Here are my rough rates, and here's what I charge. But in reality, I just need to get out in the field. I need to see your process, and then we'll come up with a solution together. And I have fundamentals that I apply to safety in general, and there's 8 of them. You've heard me talk about some of them. The answers are in the field, and I believe that that's my first one. Master the message is my second one, and that's just making sure that organizations are all on the same page in regard to communication up and down their food chain, and to make sure that people are talking the same thing. The third one is plan on drift. People naturally drift from what expectations are. Kevin, if you live on a road that it's 35 miles an hour to get to your house, I almost guarantee that after a while you hit 36, and then you hit 37, and then you hit 38, and then someone puts those speed signs up and you go, oh, okay, I got to slow down to 35 again. But what that is drift. You just drifted. People do that in organizations with whatever the expectation is, wearing safety glasses, hard hats, QA, all that stuff. Drift is human. So that's number 3, and I spend a lot of time on that. Walking the talk. That's my fourth one. Is your organization walking the talk? And I have seen a VP of a pit and quarry go out in sandals to go do a safety inspection. That's not walking the talk. You kind of need to get on the same page as your team. So those are the things I look for. And there's a few more here. Reward what you want repeated is my number 5. If you're going to reward people for production, and that's all you're going to reward them on, then they're going to do whatever they can to make production look better. So you got to make sure that your reward systems are balanced, and you're rewarding for safe production, and you're rewarding for the right things, because it's just like raising kids. Whatever I reward my kids for, they're going to do more of that. Next bullet here, and I only have a couple more. How, not why. That sounds like a very simplistic statement, but when people look into safety and incidents, often the first question is, why did that happen? Why did Joey fall off that ladder? Well, if you ask why Joey fell off the ladder, you're going to get a blame-centered kind of response back. Oh, Joey didn't know what he was doing. End of investigation. Well, that's not cool. That's not good. So ask how things happen rather than why. That's my next step with organizations. When people get into how things happen, they get away from blame and they get into the fundamentals of what happened. And that's a much, much better end result where blame becomes secondary and how becomes primary. Uh, Tight tolerances is the next thing I look at with organizations to make sure that they are doing things in a controlled fashion. And years ago, I would be able to say, Kia cars didn't have tight tolerances. That's why they weren't as expensive. They've changed, and now you can buy an $80,000 Kia. So their tolerances have gotten tighter. But if you remember the time frame when they came out, the tolerances of a Kia versus a Porsche were drastically different. So tightening up your tolerances helps safety and quality and all that stuff. My last bullet with organizations, and I do this with any organization, is not to let a metric drive a culture. Now, that can be very simply said that there's a lot of executives that might get on your podcast and you ask them how safety was, they might start talking about DART rates and PVI rates and MSHA citations per inspection day rates, all these rates. Rates can be gamified. Rates don't really reflect organizations, in my opinion. I've seen some amazing rates of 0 followed by horrid actual performance a year later. So I kind of I try to get organizations, let that metric, safety metrics are like a speedometer. You need to know they're there, but you don't drive your car by staring at the speedometer. You need to be looking at your windshield, you need to be looking at your mirrors. There's a whole lot of other activities that go on. So long story there, Kevin, but when I work with organizations and I go to give them a quote or I go to work with them, those are the fundamentals that I just went over are what I will go over with them on day one, just to say, this is my philosophy on what I'm going to look at. And I've yet to have a client say that they didn't align with any of those 8 things I just talked about, but then they know what my approach is going to be. And I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. No, that was great. I think that's a pretty awesome playbook. I was even thinking maybe there's an article there we can outline those 8 and provide some depth to it for listeners beyond this. But Steve, in the 8th one, you hit on MSHA, and I was coming into this, and I wasn't actually thinking about bringing MSHA in, but I guess I wonder from your seat, from your view, when you get into pits and quarries, obviously that's a regulator that they're dealing with periodically. It's in the back of their minds. It drives decision making, or it's supposed to, I suppose. I guess what's your take on MSHA, its role, its relationship with aggregate producers out there, and I guess how does MSHA come into play with you as a consultant at the end of the day?
Yeah, so there's how effective MSHA is, in my opinion, is a reflection as to how good the supervisor is at that pit and quarry. If that supervisor, because they're rarely going to MSHA's rarely going to show up and see me or a safety person. They're good because these places usually have one location I worked at had 212 facilities across the Northeast. You can't have 4 or 5 safety people be there all the time. So they're going to end up meeting with a supervisor. That supervisor, if they have the right attitude with MSHA, they can create a really good relationship where they're accepting feedback from MSHA, they're making changes, and their inspection processes, because they should be getting 2 a year for every pit and quarry that's open, their inspection processes will go smoothly. And your citations per inspection day, which is a rate that we often look at in the industry, they'll be below a 0.5. A 0.5 meaning every 2 days that they're out there, you might get 1 inspection and 1 citation. So people that have good relationships tend to make a more of an impact. Now, the people that might be argumentative with MSHA, you're going to see tons of citations. It's not going to be a good environment, and it almost creates a standoffish type of attitude between the inspector and the supervisor. So my response to how effective MSHA would be is it really drastically depends on how the supervisor is in regards to taking feedback. The MSHA inspectors that are out there, way different than OSHA. If OSHA comes out, it's rare to see OSHA because there's so many less OSHA inspectors out there. It's really rare to see them. And if you see them and they cite you, your citations are going to be a lot more expensive, starting off at $7,000 and going up to, Lord knows where, because they can get pretty high if it's a willful violation. MSHA is coming out to teach you. So they're there to say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. and they will cite you, and the citations are pretty low in comparison to, they could be, 50, a few $100 for a few citations are not much. But where MSHA's, if they come out and they see the same thing time and time again with the same people, those citations are going to get more expensive. It's going to get harder to fight. So my advice to people is like, listen to the MSHA rep that's out there, work with them. And if something's truly off, like if they're citing for something that doesn't make sense, that's when you can push back, but you got to do so respectfully. They aren't always right. During COVID, MSHA was sending a lot of coal inspectors to assist in surface mines. They're looking at way different things. And I actually think that's how we got to some interesting silica regulations that were proposed, because coal mining definitely has different hazards than surface mining. So you just gotta see who you're getting for an inspector, and it's okay to push back, but be smart when you're pushing back. Use your local safety resources, use your supervisors to help you out in your management team, and push back when necessary. And you won't have a problem with MSHA. MSHA, I used to tell when I was working within organizations instead of consulting, I tell the supervisor, ask them what they want you to do before they leave. Like, let them do here's your citation, and then go, what else? What else is on your mind? What else can I do better? Because when people figure that out, all of a sudden these organizations start cleaning up their hazards, which are just latent conditions out there waiting to have an incident happen. So they start cleaning that stuff up, and things go a lot smoother. In fact, the MSHA process, where they're going out there twice a year, I find it to be pretty beneficial. And I almost wish that OSHA would adopt something similar. I worked with a lot of vertically integrated sites that also had hot mix asphalt and concrete and all that. And if OSHA would come out and kind of prompt them on a few things frequently, I think you'd see better performance in those areas too.
So in a sense, I suppose you can make a case, or maybe you're making a case that MSHA at the end of the day is elevating safety if working hand in hand by the operator, and it can be a beneficial thing. I think we hear various takes from readers just based on experiences, based on one bad experience or two. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think probably leaders at MSHA would say their goal at the end of the day is like your column name, to get people to go home safely at the end of the day. I think ideally everyone's trying to move the ball in the same direction.
And you could have an errant inspector, and you could have an errant supervisor that totally blows everything I just said out of the water. And I've seen that where one site's having a hard time and they're using the same inspector that the other people are using. So often that boils down to relationships that are messing it up. So no, I do think that the field, boots on the ground MSHA inspectors are helpful. I don't have the same sentiment for how they write regulations, and I've written to MSHA a couple years ago on the silica regulations, because a lot of the proposals there I don't think had common sense to them. And they didn't have the same latitude that OSHA applies to silica hazards, where you can wear respirators and stuff. MSHA was going for saying respirators are no longer allowed to be a control. It has to be engineered. And that makes sense to a degree and to a point, and then all of a sudden it doesn't make sense, and you're going to shut small businesses down. So I'm not their enforcement in the field versus their policy rating, I think, are two different things. And I don't support some of the regulatory pushes that they're doing, but I do support what they're doing in the field. The last thing I'll say on MSHA is a cool thing to do if you're building a new facility, or if you're doing a major renovation to an MSHA facility, call up MSHA and say, before we open this, can you come do a mock inspection? They'll do that for you, and they'll do it for free. And then you have a chance to correct these issues before they become an issue. It's a tactic that I've used when we were doing expansions in other organizations, and it helped to create a good relationship with the supervisor and the MSHA inspector.
You're talking about a CAV, a corrective action visit from MSHA? Because ironically, our safety columnist writing our MSHA in the law column talked about something like this. They kind of characterized it as an opportunity. They kind of were issuing some caution where, if you don't follow this guidance, that you could have issues. So if you're going to bring them in, you're expected to kind of follow the advice, see things through. And it sounds like you can have a conversation back and forth. But I don't know, any perspective on that?
Well, my 2 cents is, if you're not doing it, they're going to catch you anyways. So
Sure.
By asking them for their 2 cents ahead of time, I don't see any negative to that, because they're going to be in your plant twice a year whether you like it or not. So if you're doing a major expansion, or it's a brand new plant, or you're doing an acquisition and you're getting a plant online for the first time, those are the times where you can either, I've seen it done both ways, and I've seen an acquisition happen and there was no proactive come in, MSHA, tell me about things, and it went horribly. It's like 16 citations like in one day,
Mhm.
as opposed to trying to get them in proactively and getting ahead of that. Now, it would give you the logical question of why didn't this organization get 16 citations when before they were acquired? Whether MSHA wants to admit it or not, they treat mom and pop organizations differently than they treat large organizations that are acquiring these mom and pop organizations. They're going to be harder on the large organizations. So if you just assume they haven't had citations, we're going to acquire them, we're not going to get citations, that's a bad assumption. You really want to get in front of that the best you can. You could do it with in-house expertise very easily. Usually, if you have an organization that big, but asking MSHA for assistance it's the same thing I would advise a general industry contractor to do with OSHA if they were building a new facility. Bring them in. I'd rather hear about the problems and then have a chance to fix them than operate blindly and then have a problem and then get blasted by federal agents.
That's interesting perspective, and it kind of leads into the next topic I wanted to bring up. Is just about safety personnel at organizations. Just from my seat, from what I've kind of seen, the larger the organization, the more bandwidth there is to have personnel dedicated to safety and health. So you get some of the top producers, they have safety personnel. Or if you get a mom and pop like you're describing, Steve, you're really lucky if you got one, because in those types of organizations, those smaller, mid-size, you're wearing a lot of hats, and you're the safety manager probably at the end of the day too, or somebody leading safety. So to put a question to it, Steve, just kind of wanted to get a sense in terms of personnel, the dynamic you've seen, at larger companies when they have dedicated folks, how that works, how effective that is, and then managing safety as a smaller organization, someone that doesn't necessarily have that person that's driving that 100% or largely as a percentage of their job. Just the differences there, the nuances, and what you've seen
Yeah,
in your experience.
yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the large organization examples first. A lot of time when I see what I can see happen in large organizations when you have a lot of safety professionals, and at one point I think I had close to 15, 20 safety pros supporting the Northeast when I was in the Northeast. What I saw as potential issues was where people assumed that those people were the ones responsible for the safety of the people in the plants and the people anywhere. Those people should be the coaches, in my opinion, the safety coaches. The people responsible for fixed facilities are the supervisors that run those facilities. And then everyone has an inherent responsibility to get home safely every day. But if you think that you can like a priority versus a value, if you think you can assign the safety priority to a person and then it becomes managed, that's not how safety works. Everyone, it's a team sport. Everyone needs to have skin in the game. And the best organizations use their safety professionals as a coach. That means if the safety person's not there, they don't say, well, we don't have to be safe because Dave isn't here today. They own safety. And having that shift mentally is really important. I've seen an organization get cited for not having personal protective equipment when there was an entire trailer full on site of personal protective equipment. But the key to that was in the safety guy's pocket, and he was 7 towns away. You got to remove the bottlenecks when it comes to safety. You never want a safety pro to be the bottleneck of safety. And that's what I would tell to any executive that might hire me from a large organization. Like, what do we do to manage our safety teams? The first thing is they make sure they're coaching and they're not a bottleneck. That'd be my first thing I would say. And I think so that's the nuances, in my opinion, from safety management in a large organization. From a smaller perspective, a lot of these small organizations aren't going to be able to have safety professionals at all. So then what they need to know is how do they, their supervisor basically is the safety person there and needs to be the conduit between MSHA and the workforce, and they're the ones assigned with getting people home safely every day. So in the small organizations, a lot of that responsibility is just naturally put on the supervisor. if they are lucky enough to have either a safety consultant or someone that's wearing a safety hat in some capacity, it's the same idea as what I said with a large organization. They have to use them as a coach, and they have to use them, to the best of their. They have to use them to their advantage for key moments. For example, I would have sites within the organizations I would support that would call me up and say, "Hey, tomorrow we're doing a really big lift. We have a crane on site. We're going to be doing a lift. Can you send a safety rep up to help us out for the day or just for the kickoff so we can get some good safety message, get on the right page?" That's how you use your safety pros. Key them in, communicate with them, pull them in at the right times. But don't, it's horrible to think that, hey, we got safety pros, they will handle safety. That's when you see things go sideways, when people assume that safety is something that has been delegated to someone who's not even on site.
Yeah, right. Well, Steve, maybe just to get into a couple specific topics. We're here obviously at midsummer. We just dropped your July column on heat stress. Again, I mentioned at the top a topic that probably a lot of readers feel like they have a handle on, yet we find moments out there or incidents happen where somebody's having a stress event, a heat stress event. And then similarly with fatigue, August is right around the corner. We're going to have a special topic and some coverage on fatigue management from you in August, Steve. So if you can maybe just offer a little bit of fodder on heat stress and fatigue management as we're kind of getting the dog days of this summer here in 25.
Absolutely. Now these two topics go together really well too, because people that are fatigued will have an easier time getting heat stress, and people that have heat stress have an easier time getting fatigue. So these mesh really well together. Now, what I think from a heat stress perspective, people underestimate how much that impacts safety on a day-to-day basis. In the month of July, I had one organization I supported that they'd have maybe 50 events in the month of July, if not more. It was pretty drastic. And a lot of it was related to heat impacting thinking. So particularly in the Northeast, where you don't get acclimated to the heat like you might in Texas or California. It's something that you get for a few weeks out of the year that's really, really impactful, like in July, and then you get used to it and it gets a little easier. But when people are not used to it, they might not be thinking clearly. It can impact decision making. And the best thing that you can do is you got to push hydration. Supervisors have to look out for their employees. And my phone rang today at 10 o'clock, but with an organization that was talking about someone yesterday that was suffering from heat stroke. And it's not even that hot. It's maybe in the 90s around here. So for that to happen in the 90s, you can imagine on an actual heat wave, how much people get impacted. So I think for heat stress, push hydration, watch your team, and then education's key on that. And if you look at the column, you can see some points on how to recognize heat stress and what to do about it. OSHA does a good job, better than MSHA actually, on outlining what to do if you have heat stress. But my 2 cents on that is, don't be a hero. If anyone has anything beyond, I'm sweating, like if they get into confusion or dizziness or anything else, get them to a doctor. It's don't let the metric drive the culture. Don't care if you're going to have an injury that hits the board. You care about the person. You don't want to mess with heat stress, particularly if someone has comorbidities, meaning that there's other health issues that might be there. You got to be careful, because heat stress can impact people in ways that are hard to walk away from. Now to shift into fatigue, Kevin, I had an incident one time where an employee worked like 120 hours in a week and just fell from ground level backwards and landed on a square fuel canister, and it cracked his ribs and punctured his lung. I mean, you're talking from someone, he was simply just walking around, fell back from being tired and hot. So fatigue management is something that organizations really have to look out for, particularly in the height of the season. And how they need to look at, my opinion, how they need to look out for it is, you need to know the hours that you're assigning to your team members. And then you also need to pay attention to the hours they're actually working. And organizations can do this by usually working with their HR teams or their finance teams that are tracking hours. So they can get a report. I used to have color-coded reports sent out to the supervisors I would work with on, if employee's name was in red, that means they went over 80 hours last week. Orange, they went over 60. Yellow, they went over 50. And then everyone else didn't, we're all in green or whatever. But it gave people that were managing, at the VP or management level, I gave them a chance to go, okay, this site's got, I need to talk with this site because they're hitting a lot of hours consistently. And we just, if it's an anomaly, that's one thing. Hey, the plant broke down. We needed to work a lot to fix it. But if it's consistent, that can point to a bigger issue, whether it be staffing concerns or whatever. So fatigue is something that definitely plagues this industry at the height of the season, and we got to do a good job managing it. And I certainly encourage any safety pros that might be listening to this. When you look at your incidents that occur in July and August, things that might come through is, I remember one time a guy just falling when he was going to get his lunch and like rolled his ankle or whatever. It was a recordable injury, but it's heat played into it. It was like 100-degree day. He worked all day long and he, sweaty, tired. And then you have people just go down. Now, to call that a slip, trip, and fall is accurate, but the cause of that is what people often miss. And if you get to it goes back to the how versus why. The guy who fell on the way to the lunchbox, why did he fall? Oh, it's just Joey going to get his lunchbox, and he fell. How did he fall? If you get into that and you go, well, hey, this guy's worked 70 hours this week. It's 100 degrees out. The humidity's high. We're not used to it. That's when you can get into some of the real things. And then what do you do about it? And that's there's no silver bullet, but that's as close as you're going to get. What do you do about these things? So for heat, as we said, throw in hydration. I've seen people throw up pop-up tents where they can. One year I worked with an expert to get hydration chairs. They were like camp chairs, and you would put your arms in these buckets of ice that were by the chairs. If you cool down this area of your arm, you can cool your core temperature down extremely quickly. The FBI does that with their field agents. That's what they do to keep people cool. So we tried the same thing in the pits and quarries. So you just got to get creative and how to prevent these things. The first step is figuring out what's going on. For fatigue, that's a harder nut to crack, right? You got to start measuring hours. You got to figure out staffing. That's an operational challenge that they need to do with the input of safety professionals and human resources professionals, because usually it's a workplace kind of assigning of work type of thing as well. So these are all these are things that AI will never take this work away from us, right? Like you're always going to need the human element of analyzing the art and the science behind the challenges that we have.
Well, Steve, we got into a couple of specific topics here at the end. We talked big picture about how operations are going about safety, or not necessarily. We even got into MSHA and talked about your career and entry into this area of the industry. But any other messages you want to impart on our readers? Again, I would just say to those listening and watching, make sure you check out Steve's Going Home Safely Every Day column monthly in Pit and Quarry. But Steve, any final thoughts before we part ways here?
My only final thought, and this is for anyone, whether it's an executive in the organization or a guy who just started or girl who just started yesterday, is when your gut senses that something is wrong, stop. And when I say stop, you just call timeout. I'm not talking about stopping forever, but call timeout and gather with your teammates, gather with the supervisor, and try to figure out how to tackle a solution. Probably close to 95% of the investigations I've done over the past 25 years, people knew there was a problem and they didn't stop. So be better than that. Don't be worried about being the odd man out by calling timeout. Pull that Bill Belichick flag, throw it up in the air, and just figure out a way to move forward. But you might get a little bit of flack from the get-go, but I guarantee you'll get more respect from stopping when unsure.
Well, Steve, thanks again for the time here today. We appreciate and value the partnership we have with you on the column, and readers and listeners can look forward to more from you in the months to come.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin.
Well, thanks again to Steve Fuller Company, for joining the show. Really enjoyed the opportunity to sit down and talk safety with him. Appreciate him just kind of answering some things that we didn't originally plan to get into, MSHA, for example. But I'd mentioned at the top of the show, Jack, that Steve had 8 messages that he kind of shares with each company he visits. Basic things, the ideas of like having the ability to master the message, the safety message that you're trying to deploy as a company, planning on drift. He shared that example about, and I've got one of these by my house, but if you live in a 25 mile an hour zone or a 35 mile an hour zone, Jack, I know you're the speedster on the roadways now and then.
Here and there.
Yeah. So the idea of drift, like we're conditioned to go 5 miles an hour over, 10 miles an hour over, and every once in a while they'll pop one of those speed zone signs to kind of show you your speed, and it kind of serves as a reminder. So I thought he really had good, simple messages for companies. And sometimes I think it's just a matter of, bringing in a fresh voice on safety, because I think everybody, like Steve said, like we all believe, we all want to go home safely every day, but we can get complacent, and it's not necessarily easy to stay focused 100% of the time. We're in the dog days of summer here, and the heat's kind of wearing on people. People are getting tired, especially in those seasonal operations. Steve was talking about the seasonality of, being in New England, and they're doing a lot of work in 6 months, whereas in the southern part of the country, Jack, they're able to maybe do things a little bit more balanced and at a better pace. Maybe that has a better impact on safety. So, again, just the simple things sometimes and that impact and make gains for companies on safety. And I thought Steve had really good, simple messages that he shared on the podcast here today.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think when you have someone like Steve who is able to go into these operations as a consultant and kind of make these points that, can at times, again, like you said, how many times have we talked to a producer or, been at a panel or been at some type of event where, they always say, oh, safety is our top priority. And it is. And I don't think anyone's doubting that. But you hear that over and over again. And eventually it kind of starts falling on deaf ears. And it's like, all right, yeah, safety, PPE, this and that. So when you have something, or when you have someone that can turn sort of these key points into these concise little things that you can just kind of remember throughout the day, make it a little more engaging. I think one of the ones that I liked the most of these 8 points here was reward what you want to be repeated. It's so easy to discipline what isn't working, but if you reward what is working, it's sort of the carrot and stick thing. There's one that's going to yield much better results. That's going to drive people to want to do better again and again, rather than, or I guess I should say they're going to want to do better rather than not do wrong or not do poorly, essentially. So I think, and again, just finally, the way you put it, I think taking these simple approaches is important, because it is unfortunate, I should say, that we hear so much about powered haulage, we hear about machinery, we hear about these massive causes of injuries and fatalities, but we don't think about the small stuff day to day that can also lead to injuries, that can lead to, if not an injury or fatality, you're putting yourself in a more precarious situation that could potentially lead to that. Again, you talk about the drift, people straying from where they need to be. So I think being able to address sort of these finer details rather than the stuff that maybe gets the headlines so often is certainly important. And, I appreciate all of Steve's insights, and I'm looking forward to continuing working with him and seeing more great columns and hopefully having more great conversations.
Yeah, if you want to read Steve's work, again, pick up the magazine. We've got his entire library of content on our website. You can find that at pitandcorey.com/Steve Fuller. So thanks again to Steve for joining us. And as we kind of wrap the interview yesterday, Jack, I was really enthusiastic about it. And I told him, I'm like, we got to bring you back on the show. I feel like there's so much that we can kind of dive into. So if you enjoyed this episode, probably look for one down the road in the months to come. I'd love to have Steve back and continue to publish his work in Pit and Corey magazine. Well, next time on Pit and Corey, we're going to change it up a little bit. So we had a safety focus here today. Last time, Jack, we played your interview with Dodge Construction Network's Eric Gauss. That was episode 45, so we kind of got into the construction market and what's happening economically. And we're going to bring a producer on the show next time around, and that's going to be Rich Sazy of Big Town Concrete. He's down in Texas, and right now he's actually the chairman of the Texas Aggregates and Concrete Association. Texas is the biggest crushed stone producing state in the country, and huge opportunity there. A lot of activity, a lot of infrastructure demand, great funding for infrastructure on a federal and state level. And we hear a lot of times, Jack, how sometimes aggregates or infrastructure is local. It's very much market driven. The whole state of Texas, it seems like they continue to go gangbusters down there. They're kind of an exception, I suppose, in terms of demand and activity. So if you're in Texas and you want to hear what's going on from the head of TACA, Rich Stacey's Big Town Concrete is going to be on the show next time. And if you're outside of Texas and you're envious and you just want to know what's going on in the top crushed stone producing state in the country, Rich is going to have that point of view for you. And I'm looking forward to talking about infrastructure, what's happening in the market, and we're going to get into the workforce and environment and sustainability a little bit too, because that's something that's kind of evolving in the Lone Star State these days. Beyond,
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say. I mean, in or out of Texas, it's like you said, being the biggest crushed stone producing state in the country, gonna be a good barometer of sort of where the industry as a whole is sort of falling and maybe some indicators. So, looking forward to hearing that interview.
And we've heard him before, Jack. He's a great speaker. He was at Young Leaders a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to hearing what Rich has to share with our readers here at Midsummer. And beyond the podcast, you should be able to pick up your August edition here very soon. This episode's dropping July 29th, and if you haven't gotten it yet, you can look for it very soon. We should have a digital edition up by now, so check that out at pitandcorey.com. We've got a focus again on washing and classifying, a special section dedicated to that, so you can read all about that and more in the latest issue of Pit and Corey. Again, I want to thank Steve Fuller of the Steve Fuller Company for being our special guest today, and want to thank our show sponsor once more. Did you know East Rock Solutions is now part of the Kemper Group? And together, they're raising the bar on parts availability, equipment solutions, and turnkey plant design. From the pit to the stockpile, Kemper Group has got your operation covered. To learn more, visit KemperEquipment.com or call 610-273-2066. Thanks to Kemper. Well, thanks again to Steve Fuller. Thanks again to Kemper for being our show sponsor, and we'll see you next time.
See you.